Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever you folks are all dialing in or listening into this podcast, welcome, welcome on board. My name is Raghu Banda. I live in the sunny California in the West Coast in the US. Yes, in the upper, on the far west of the US. So I live here. I live here in the East Bay. I work for a company called SAP, a business software firm. So, this is my new attempt in creating some podcasts around the topic that I've been kind of doing a lot of blogs or kind of a lot of audio talks at the conferences. So, in the podcast, I'm trying to create a podcast series which helps the users, the end users, or which helps the listeners of SAP technologies or listeners of machine learning and predictive analytics uh, get a feel of what is out there and how you can leverage some of these technologies with uh, and how we can benefit from them. So I will be in the series of this podcast. I will be trying to do it as a bi-weekly podcast, so that you'll have maybe two sessions or two podcasts in a month, and I'll try to cover some of the topics around machine learning and predictive analytics and how, in the context of SAP, because I've been working with SAP, in the context of SAP, how we are using these technologies and what you can learn or what you can understand. And then you can go into the blog series for more details. And of course, we are also having some best practices kind of a package or best practices kind of a content that is coming out where you can get to know a lot more things. So, welcome on board and enjoy, relax, sit back, relax, and enjoy the talk. If you have any questions, feel free to put some feedback, and then I'll try to cover it in my next podcast. Or you can always reach out on my blog series and put some questions. So, now let us continue in this podcast as I've explained briefly. So, we'll first focus on before getting into the technologies of how SAP is embedding or infusing AI and ML, we'll first kind of get into a background about predictive analytics and machine learning, and then we will slowly get into that. So, all of us, as soon as in our daily lives, when you wake up in the morning or when you kind of go out and come back. So, let us take the example of when you wake up in the morning. You kind of right away you know what to do. You kind of are designed or you are internally programmed that you have to wake up, go do your brushing, and then do your regular restroom activities and come out, have a shower, have a breakfast, and then go out, whether it is to the school to drop off the kids or whether it is to go to your office. Or currently, I know nowadays we are all sitting at our homes and working from home uh, due to these pandemic times. So currently, we are all working from home. So kind of making sure that the kids are, if you have kids, the kids are put up in their Zoom sessions for their classroom sessions. Your family working in different room and you working in different room. So in a way, you know what are the sequence of events that have to happen. You nobody needs to tell you to do this or to do that. You already have a program already designed, either given by the schools or by their or as planned according to your calendar schedule. You already know what you have to do. And apart from that, your home related activities, whether it is your personal activities like cooking your food or having breakfast, taking a shower. All these kind of things are ingrained. Everything is programmed. And nobody needs to tell us that, okay, you have to do this activity and you have to go and do this activity and you have to come back. All this is designed. How does this all happen? Because our brains are already programmed. We learned it over a period of time that yes, to kind of get these kind of things done, you have to follow certain steps. So this is, I would say, the first level of predictions. So the basic level of predictions, our brain is already ingrained because we have been internally programmed. And sometimes, and when you see a kid, they kind of grow or they kind of get programmed to work, to do the things that way. So this is how things have been put. Like this is how things we learn. So I would say this is the first level of involving or doing predictions in a daily life on an individual level. So now let us take it to the next step where you have to go out to a restaurant or to go out to a grocery store, or you have to go to a gas station to put some gas, or you have to go to a marketplace. Or nowadays, since again it is, we are all working from home, we still have to, though you don't need to go out so often like in the past, you still have to make some transactions, right? Like you have to go online if you have to order some food or order some essentials, order some items. You still have to go there into the internet, into particular websites, and then order these kind of things, and then they get delivered automatically, or it takes some time, of course. There is a process involved in that, whether you do ordering online or whether you go to a store or a marketplace. There are some sequence of steps. So here you are acting as a customer or a consumer of these different services. And when you go to these shopping places or the marketplaces or the groceries or the restaurants, the vendors there, they are very much in line. They need to understand. So what they understand, the behavior of these customers like us, like you, like me, what we do on a daily basis, how we go, how we shop, what we do, what we kind of uh, need mostly. And based on that, those kind of items are made available or made available for purchase online or either in the store, or if it is the food, kind of make available that it is the raw material or the products are available. So there is again some kind of pattern or some kind of data, some kind of learning which these consumer oriented companies have done, whether it is your Walmarts or Targets or Amazon marketplace, or whether it's any of your regular restaurant chains. There is some kind of a market around that. So these kind of things, again, your consumer marketplace, they are designed to do so few things. So they learn based out of your customer behavior, like our behavior, and they make sure things happen. So this is the second level of, I would say, taking it up further notch. From an individual level, now we went into a consumer space or a consumer market. So now here you understand how the things are behaving in a consumer marketplace. Again, here there is a lot of learning for the consumer space, for the consumer oriented merchants, right there. Here it is not only one person, but there are thousands of customers, or in some cases it might be millions of customers. They have to learn all of this the behaviors, the learnings, and a lot of things based out of what we do, what we act. So again, this is way how things are being built, right? So you learn, the consumer space, the consumer companies learn about this, they make sure that the things are available, and then they take it up further. So there is here again, there is one level of machine learning and predictive analytics that is engraved into their business processes, their consumer processes. Now, let us switch it a bit further. Let us notch it up a little more into the enterprise space. So, what happens into the enterprise space? So, it is things are even more complicated. Now, you have one more layer. In the enterprise space, whether it is an Amazon or whether it is a an auto manufacturer like Mercedes Benz, or whether it is Tesla, or it might be any other kind of a manufacturing company in the enterprise space. Now they also have to understand not only the consumer behavior, but also their suppliers and their vendors and their how their manufacturers and their internal vendors and how are their employees behaving. So in the enterprise space, it's not just with the consumers, but it is also with their customers and their suppliers and their vendors. So things become even more complicated. And again, there is a lot of data there. There's a lot of patterns, how things are happening in the past, and how you are taking it from the past behaviors, what you are learning, and what kind of decisions you are making. Because this is very important, right? Like for your senior management or executive management, they have to make some decisions. They have, based on this, what kind of things are selling well, what kind of things are doing well, or what kind of programs you have to keep in place so that you design better products and understand better behaviors. So your the companies, the enterprise, in the enterprise space, things are even more complicated. You will have to make sure that you not only reach your top line revenues, but also you maintain your bottom line costs. So there are a lot of things you have to learn, uh, and you have to adapt accordingly. Some companies, they do it so well, some are still catching up. That is where the beauty of machine learning and predictive analytics come into picture. And what best you can understand from SAP, because SAP is the king of business software. They have been in this world, in this business software, for the last 45 to 50 years, right from the mainframe, right from the mainframe technologies to transitioning into the client server technologies, into the web services, into the internet world, and then later on into the cloud computing. And now here we are with injecting AI and machine learning and predictive analytics into the business processes. So, end of the day, what you're trying to do, you're trying to build an intelligent enterprise. All your customers in the enterprise world, you want to make them more intelligent so that they can focus more, the mundane tasks or the regular things are taken care based on their patterns, and we understand and provide more recommendations and suggestions so that your top engineers or your employees or your shop floor employees or whoever it is, they can focus on other things. It is that you are we are providing you are providing more options that are available for you to do better. So that is what we are trying to do, right? So in this enterprise space, like I've explained, SAP has transitioned as well, and we have come up with, in the latest era of infusing intelligence into the business processes or your business applications, we have come a long way. So prior to the inception of SAP's S4 HANA, which is a latest gen ERP. Uh, Prior to that, SAP was mainly having their older ERP versions, like the ECC versions. I think if you're an SAP technology consultant or an uh, SAP customer or SAP partner, you understand what I'm talking, right? Like before the inception of S4, the older technologies, the ECC and the ERP world, you had a lot of things happening there. So our journey with AI or injecting intelligence started even before the inception of S4. So what my thoughts or what my plan is that I'll start in the podcast series, I'll first try to come up with the pre S4 HANA days, how the things are in the old ERP world, and how we have added predictions or a little bit of machine learning into that, into those processes, and how did we make it better. And now with the inception of S4, where we redesigned it completely end to end so that it's much more robust and it can work in the cloud, it can run in the cloud with a much more beautiful UI, the latest HTML5 based UI, and the real-time database with HANA, and then much more redesigned UIs which run in the cloud, the the new business processes. So we will go a little more further into this and kind of go into the details of how we have evolved from the pre-SAP S4 HANA days into the current SAP S4 HANA days. And we will also look into how the AI related technologies are being embedded into this. So, in this way, what will happen is that you will understand not only how we are doing it currently, but you will also get an idea of how we have done it in the past and how we are using some of those best practices and going further. So, that is the overall idea of this podcast series. So, like I said, the podcast, I will be focusing on doing this at least 2 times a month and trying to do it at least 15 to 20 minutes or maybe at the most 30 minutes each session. In the 30 minutes, I would like to talk about one particular scenario and one particular problem and then get into that. So, in the current, like I've explained, in the current episode, the main focus is that we will we want I want to explain what I want to do in the next few podcasts. So we'll start with this. We'll start with the brief history before S4 HANA days and how we have transitioned into SAP after the inception of S4 HANA, how we started building these machine learning and predictive analytics into the business processes. We'll give a quick overview on that in one session. And then in a further down the lane, we go into a bit more details into the architecture, and then uh, we kind of go into the details about how the processes are built and how we kind of are enhancing these processes. I know sometimes you might find it tough. You might think that how can I talk about architecture and processes in an audio session, but believe me, I'll try to make it as easier to understand so that when you read the blog series or when you go into the SAP technologies or when you go into the content, into the SAP content, you will be able to at least connect some of these dots. So let us see what we can do further and how I can make your experience much more rich when you're using the SAP products. Okay, so let us now continue further. So I would like to explain what I would want to discuss in the next few sessions in this podcast series. So, like I explained in the brief opening or in the introduction, I would want to start with a brief introduction or a brief give a historical background about where SAP is coming in from. Even before the pre-SAP S4 HANA days, how the things are, how we did set up the things with, how did we, because as SAP, as I mentioned before, SAP has been in the ERP world for quite some time, been more than 45 to 50 years. So there is a humongous amount of knowledge. So even before SAP S4 HANA days, uh, we did leverage the predictive technologies and embedded these predictive technologies into the business processes in the old ERP world as well, and built some build some apps around it. So I'll start with giving a brief introduction on that, a quick background on that, a a history tour, I would say, or a historical background, and then we get into the SAP S4 HANA world, where I will give an overview in one of these sessions. I'm actually talking in sequentially, right? So it'll start with a session with the historical background and then get into the SAP S4 HANA scenario, where we have how what are the different approaches available, how you could do predictive analytics and machine learning with SAP S4HANA. So once we enter into this SAP S4HANA world, we go into a much more deeper into that. So the first session, obviously, after the historical background, will be going into this uh, deep dive into the different approaches that are available. So once we talk about the different approaches available, in here, this is a session which is very important, because this is where I will go into a bit more details about what are the different ways how we are doing this, whether we are, if we have to embed the machine learning and predictive analytics solutions into the SAP S4HANA business processes, how do we do? And then in some scenarios, we do not embed into the business process, but it is more built like a machine learning service that sits on SAP Cloud Platform, leveraging either the SAP Data Intelligence or SAP AI Business Services. AI Business Services, we call, I think in the past, it was based out of the Leonardo platform, which we no longer use that term. So we say SAP AI Business Services. So when we build a machine learning service, that is the other approach, right? Like you build it on SAP Cloud Platform. And then I'll talk about in that session these services, these machine learning services, how are they captured or consumed into the SAP S4 stack. And then, of course, a third approach, which is where how you can leverage for a business user, how you can leverage SAP Analytics Cloud. Again, there are some algorithms, the Smart Predict, which uses the HANA APL algorithms, and then how you can use that, take a particular released whitelisted CDS view in SAP S4 HANA, and how you can extend that and create a quick predictive scenario or a predictive model and visualize it in SAP Analytics Cloud. So these are the things we go much more deeper with some examples when I'm talking about in the approaches session. After this approaches session is done, I think in the next broadcast, I think like I briefly mentioned, we'll go into the architecture and the process flows. This will be an interesting session, believe me, because it's going to be, you might be thinking, how would you make people understand in an audio session about the architecture and the process flows? Process flows, yeah, it's easier to explain, I think, because you could give an example. But architecture, I think, yeah, I know it's a challenging thing, but believe me, I'll try to make it more interesting and explain in layman terms so that it's easier to capture. And when you read the blog, you will get the complete uh, concept behind it. The overall idea is that even even in a podcast, I want to make sure that you could understand SAP technology. That is where how a customer, SAP customer, or a partner, or a consultant should get a grasp of it. So that's the overall idea. And believe me, I think it's going to be an interesting talk. After that, we of course talk into, like I said, like I explained, we'll talk into the process flow. What is the process flow involved, and how do we take it further, and how is it embedded into the business processes, the end-to-end processes. After that session, there will be one session dedicated, one podcast dedicated, I believe, into the scope and functionality that is already released. So there are quite a few scenarios that we have already released, whether it is in the embedded world or whether it is in the side-by-side models. When we say side-by-side, it is the scenarios that are built outside of SAP S4HANA, whether it is on SAP Cloud Platform or SAP Analytics Cloud. That is where we call it side-by-side scenarios. So whether it is the embedded world or side-by-side world, quite a few use cases have been released in the upward of 45 plus. So in one session, we will go into the scope and functionality about what all different scenarios are released, just like a quick talk, a high level talk about all this. And then the subsequent session would then be, how do you activate these scenarios? This will be again an interesting talk. I'll take one example from each of these scenarios, each of these approaches, whether it is an embedded approach or whether it is a side-by-side approach with SAP Cloud Platform, Data Intelligence, or SAP Analytics Cloud, and then take it further in the example, and then uh, how do you activate it, and then you can easily link it up when you do the implementation or when you encounter a scenario. After that talk, the next podcast I think would be the, I would say the next three. I don't know. I still did not decide whether I will make it like three podcasts or one big podcast, which talks about all the three different approaches in depth. So this is where the individual sessions would help picking up one approach and doing a deep dive into this approach. What is in fact uh, needed, whether you're doing an embedding session, whether you are doing a embedded business process with intelligence, with machine learning and predictive analytics, or whether you build a service, a machine learning service, and consume it. So these will be. I would rather say I would rather do three different talks so that it would also help the end user, the listener, whether it is a customer or the partner. So these three talks will again, like I said, will focus on the three different approaches: the embedding approach, the side-by-side model approach on SAP Analytics Cloud and SAP Cloud Platform. And this is where I know this you might have then, once I finish this, then you might have questions about uh, how are we. Yes, we have, now we know the architecture, we know the process flow, we know how you have done it, how you have embedded, and you've also talked about the different business processes. But now you might have a question: how are we, if I have to make some changes, or if I have to extend this scenario or enhance this scenario, how do I do that? So yes, so that will be one session, um, which is where uh, there are ways of how you can extend or enhance a scenario that is already released, whether it is an embedded scenario or if side-by-side models. So one session I will focus on that. It might be a short session, but it is worth to put it a separate podcast or a separate talk, so that it gives the meaning to that, how you could realistically enhance these scenarios that are already released, because there are different ways of extending or enhancing a session, a predictive or a machine learning model. You could enhance it by changing the algorithm, or changing the parameters, or changing the logic, or changing the data set. There's a lot of things, changing the formulas involved in that. So that would make sense to have a separate session on that. So that would be, I would say, at the cusp of the end of the blog, not the blog series, the podcast series. And one last session after that would be to give an introduction into the book, because like I've mentioned, I co-authored a book about how to implement machine learning with SAP uh, business processes, SAP S/4HANA. So this I have done the book along with my co-author, Dr. C.R. Surfaras, who is based out of the SAP Germany office. So we have co-authored the book, which was released in September. So one session will be focused on the talk around that. Uh, and I know, like, we are all going through. these pandemic times. I know you have all been working from home or doing a lot of Zoom calls. So that is the reason I want to take the stress out of that. And rather than doing a video sessions or a video blog or reading, I'm trying to create some podcast. So, like you say, like necessity is the mother of invention. In that way, we I'm trying to see how we can uh, create more interest, or I want to make sure that you could understand in an easier way what are the different things that are available. So that is one of the reasons I've put forward this effort in creating this podcast series. And I look forward to do this, like I said, 2 times a month. In that way, I should be able to cover all these sessions within the next 2 quarters before we all go back to our real working place at our offices. I know it's quite a challenge working from home and managing a lot of things. So I want to kind of add some fun factor into that with this podcast series, giving uh, on the other side of how you could leverage machine learning and predictive analytics rather than reading through or attending a Zoom session or webinars. So yeah, I'll try to make it as interesting as possible, but I really appreciate all your time and efforts in trying to listen into this. I'll also give links into this to this podcast from my blogs and other places. Uh, okay, thank you all and stay safe. Happy predicting the future with this. Okay, now that we have given an introduction to the podcast series, I would like to end this introduction podcast. Uh, and like I've mentioned, we will be doing our next podcast in the next 2 weeks or so. So we'll have 2 podcasts in a month. And hopefully, we'll be able to cover all these topics in the next 2 quarters. Hopefully, by let us see how it goes, how it takes. And one important thing, I would like to have your feedback. You could send me your feedback by responding to this podcast, and you can even ask questions wherever this podcast is played. And of course, you could always put questions or comments or feedback at my blog, in my blog series as well, because my podcast links would also be made available in the blog series. So in that way, we can make it much more interactive. I'll try to take some of those questions or feedback, and then I'll try to address that in my upcoming podcasts. Uh, have a wonderful day, wonderful afternoon, or wonderful evening, wherever you folks are dialed in from or tuned in to listen to this podcast. Thank you all. Stay safe and happy predicting the future with SAP. Thank you. Yeah, by the way, now that you have listened to my first or introduction podcast, I would like to give you a little more information about how you can search me up. You can search me up by typing in Raghu Banda, SAP Blogs, and you should be able to quickly pick out my blog series so that you can follow my blog series, and I'll be linking the podcast into the blog series as well, in addition to wherever other places it is linked up. Thank you and have a wonderful day, wonderful afternoon or evening, wherever you're listening in from or tuning in from. Happy predicting the future with SAP and SAP products. Thank you.